Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Katie Shern. I'm here again on behalf of the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership. Today we're going to be talking about developing a theory of change. So the purpose of this video is to understand theory of change and why it's important for working in place-based systemic approaches. The module is intended to be practical and does provide a few templates and examples of how to apply this to your work. So it's a slightly longer module than normal, 20 minutes, but this includes a narrated video of 5 minutes from one of the place-based partnerships. So let's start with what is a theory of change and, importantly, how might we use it for evaluation. Theory of change is essentially a comprehensive description and illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. We can think of it as both a process and as an output. The process is about starting from the desired point that you want to get to and working backwards to understand what conditions need to be in place for that to happen. In a complex system, the outcomes or where you want to get to might be quite different, but ultimately we are all interested in reducing levels of physical inactivity and narrowing inequalities in physical activity. Theory of change is most successful when it's participatory, which means that the people who you are trying to work with and for are involved in its development. So it's kind of best viewed as a collective exercise, and the more inclusive of different perspectives, the better. So let's just think about that in a little bit more depth. If the theory of change process allows you to articulate what you're doing and how that relates to what you're hoping to achieve, then it provides a space and a place to be able to make that clear and explicit to the people that you're working with. And importantly, if you include the views and the input from a range of other partners, it can help to establish differences of opinion about how change may happen or where people value different things. So it can be seen as a communication tool as well. When you've established a theory of change, which may change over time, but when you've got something established, then it can help you identify what you actually need to learn about, to test those theories and to check whether or not the things that you expect to happen are really happening. And that helps to guide or refine the evaluation methods in your data collection. And importantly, it provides one tool to help you reflect and learn on how progress is being made, or indeed whether things that you hadn't anticipated are actually important to change you want to see, and that you need to consider different approaches as you go forward. These two images may help to demonstrate more visually what we mean by a theory of change. The first image on the left is a half-built bridge, and it demonstrates the implications of not really focusing on the end goal or desired outcome to begin with. Here the builders have failed to focus on that end goal and have realised that perhaps they should have chosen a different mode of transport in the first place. So the bridge here might be the conditions or the activities or the initiatives that are thought to make the change, but really they haven't established other means and ways of actually getting there. The diagram on the right can also highlight that there are some elements within place-based approaches which are just really messy and non-linear, and if you don't sort of start to think about, well, what kinds of things might we be able to do, how can we make progress, incremental changes, then there can be quite a big gap between the starting points and the end points. So it's really acknowledging that whilst we might not know all of the answers at the outset, it's important to try to articulate why you think things may need to change and make that explicit to others. So I should highlight that theory of change is not a new concept. It has its roots in community development and has more recently been adopted widely across the public sector to encourage people to think about how projects and programmes may reach their outputs and outcomes and impacts. And if that's of interest to understand how projects and programmes are working, then NPC's 10 steps approach is a good place to start for guidance on how to develop a theory of change. But theory of change maybe look and feel quite different when thinking about whole systems and place-based approaches. this is where we're not really thinking so much about projects and programs. We're thinking about complexity and the reality of developing and delivering actions and initiatives that are really interwoven and embedded in the ways of working in a place. So whilst it's not going to look exactly the same as a theory of change about a project or a program, it does still help you to express this complexity and keep you on track. But it also means that there are different ways of developing this and visually representing your ideas about how change will happen. And that should really be tailored to the stakeholders and the partners and the community members that you're working with, something that they agree helps to articulate. So those of you viewing this video because you are working with Sport England, the place evaluation and learning approach does highlight the need for a place-based theory of change. And also reflecting back on previous modules about a comprehensive approach to evaluation and learning, we very much do propose that theory-led explanations are important when trying to guide this work. So it's really consistent with the overall place evaluation and learning approach. Also, just reflecting on previous modules, we've already introduced things like the conceptual framework and the conditions of change. And it's important to recognise that these may inspire local theories of change, but not necessarily drive them. So what we mean by this is that the really important part of theory of change is that it reflects your local context and the outcomes that you want to see. So you may use these conditions as scaffolding, ways of working, or the foundations and practices that are important for developing your outcomes. But how they actually look and feel within your place and whether there are other drivers will be up to you. So now I'm just going to introduce a few examples of how you might demonstrate or articulate theory of change. Let's start with something that is looking at an overall programme, and again it's very simplified and it's very high level, but it helps just to get maybe the widest possible range of stakeholders on board with how you're trying to achieve the changes you're trying to achieve. So we start with the long-term outcomes, taking these directly from DCMS and Sport England. These are increased activity, decreasing inactivity, narrowing inequalities and providing positive experiences for children and young people. What we recognise is that these outcomes are not wholly determined by the work that you can do in your place. They are really determined by other salient contexts such as the socio-demographics, the geographic context, perhaps the historical relationships between people within a place, and there's really many things that can actually drive whether or not people are active in the long term. Now, you're not necessarily in control of those things, but it is worth recognising what those influences are and the extent to which your place-based work can make any changes to those wider term influences. And if they can't, then recognise that those are limitations on what you can achieve locally. Something that's perhaps a little bit more within your control is how you try to work across places to create those short-term outcomes, so more mature conditions. And this is where we can think about some of those conditions on the previous slide about, do we have collaborative working partnerships? Are we identifying really the barriers of physical activity in our local context and sharing that knowledge with partners? So those might be seen as short-term outcomes, and they may be determined by both the scale, composition and the deployment of resources specifically for place-based working or whole systems approaches to physical activity, but also guiding actions and interventions within the place. So do bear in mind that this is not something that it works on a linear kind of A to B kind of process. There will be different pathways to impact. And so it's important also to try to recognise those feedback loops and learning to action. The second template here is perhaps a little bit more familiar for those used to traditional logic model, but it is based around a cycle or a feedback loop and does also include here at the bottom the contextual factors that might be impacting on place. You'll receive a copy of these slides, so I won't go into the very detailed part of it, but really it highlights a reflection tool to work through with participants. So where are we now? What resources will we use? What will we need to change or do? How are we going to do this? What change will we see in the medium term? What change will we see in the longer term? And what will the situation look like in a set amount of time forward? And you can see that this is sort of based on a loop. You can do this for elements of your place-based approach, or you could do this on the whole thing, dependent on people's what people want to do locally. So here's another example of a theory of change template, which is really based on a learning cycle. And you'll notice with this one that it doesn't end with an outcome that is about population change. It ends with outcomes which are about better quality data analysis or evidence of strengthened support. And this might be realistic in a place-based approach, because we know that it takes a significant amount of effort to just align people, stakeholders towards this way of working. So to just run through this briefly, we have agreement on the problem. Again, you may use the conceptual framework and the system maturity model to inspire and understand what it is you're trying to do, but you don't have to. Agreement on solutions and policy options. And don't underestimate how much time it may take to gather that agreement with local stakeholders and community members, and to recognise that there might be different viewpoints. It's so important that if you do reach out and you do gather a range of influences and a range of viewpoints, that part of your role is to increase the visibility of those perspectives, particularly those that are not heard as often. Then you may think about how do we increase and sustain organisational capacity to work on those solutions and policy options identified, and how do we increase the data and analysis that is focused on the success or otherwise of those new ways of working, that we've strengthened alliances and perhaps strengthened that base of support for physical activity. So we turn now just to remind you that the theory of change is something which is part of an active learning cycle in place-based approaches. So it's a structure that can help you to reflect and think through what you expect to happen based on the action you're taking and what actually happens in practice. And whilst we really recommend to have an overarching theory of change that reflects the widest possible sense of the work, it is still also possible to have nested cycles or nested theories of change within that work to help guide smaller aspects of it. So the next couple of slides I'm just going to go over quite quickly, because there's a narrated video that's embedded within this module which I will play for you to hear it in their own words. But the following slides explore the development of a common purpose model, which is a theory of change developed by the South Tees LDP, which is called You've Got This. So it's an interesting example because it's not about how do we achieve the outcomes of narrowing inequalities, but it's about how do we bring more stakeholders along with us with our vision of active lives as a way of life. It started looking like this, but the team developed it for themselves to look like this over time. And I'll hand it over to Cara and to Lauren to explain.
Welcome to this explainer video of our common purpose model. Before we go into the narrated presentation, we're just going to go and introduce ourselves. So I'm Lauren Perkin, one of the programme officers over at You've Got This.
Hi, and I'm Cara Danks. I'm a research fellow with Sheffield Hallam University, and I'm an embedded researcher with You've Got This, working on their process evaluation. So we hope you find the narrated presentation useful. If you'd like to get in touch to discuss any aspects of it, there's a route to contact at the end of the video.
The Common Purpose Model was co-created by the core team in You've Got This and the Academic Process Evaluation team to support learning, to provide a framework as part of the ongoing ReList process evaluation, and to guide working practices. You've Got This is the Sport England Local Delivery Pilot, or LDP, in South Tees. and the model was specifically developed to explore the professional stakeholder journey.
The work we do and everyone in the South Tees is embedded in and impacted by national structures, policies and culture. In addition to the national structures, policies and culture, there is also highlighted a local structures, policies and culture. This can be different local policies that may be in place on a local level, but also how the national structures and policies may be applied at a local level.
The model shows 3 key ingredients that are argued to sustain a common purpose. Vision plus value plus common function equals common purpose. So this argues that people should subscribe to the vision. So in this case, for You've Got This, it's active lives as a way of life. To value that vision, so in relation to their professional and personal objectives, and to perform a common function, so to work together in line with that vision and produce a result of some kind. These aspects are shown in the model as flowing from one into another in line with the ways in which the LDP has seen system change emerge. It should be recognised, however, that in reality there are feedback loops and the process is non-linear.
The initial element in building the relationship and creating a common purpose together is how we work and communicate with our partners, such as developing interactive workshops and the language that we use. This is shown as engagement on the model.
The second element is working with partners to establish a two-way relationship, to share, utilise and value stories, data and knowledge. This is shown as insight on the model.
The third element is facilitating opportunities for partners to come together, both with the LDP and each other to work with a shared purpose. This is shown as collaborative working.
The fourth element is supporting people to evolve from collaborative working to share in accountability, successes, responsibility and power in actively working towards the vision. This is shown as collective leadership on the model.
The final element of the model is to formalise the new ways of working, so they can remain active beyond the individuals and the relationships in the LDP and create a legacy. This is shown as embedded process.
It is recognised that the relationship with partners is key, and building trust is an important aspect of that. This is fluid and can be impacted by local and national contexts.
These core elements are the actions by which the LDP team aim to build a common purpose in the South Tees. We collectively then can achieve the vision of active lives as a way of life.
It is argued that when these elements are enabled by the local and national contexts, that system change can occur, i.e. meaningful and sustainable shifts towards active lives as a way of life.
Thank you very much from the team over at You've Got This. If you'd like to keep up to date with any of the new things that are happening with us over here, then feel free to follow us on Twitter and also on LinkedIn. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter, which is on our website, and you can keep up to date with any new events and also any learning that will be going on to there. Thanks very much.
So hopefully you can see that there are ways of doing theory of change which are really varied and different according to its purpose. And I've just also highlight that we see theory of change as different from the explanatory theories that we'll cover in upcoming modules. We should highlight also that there are some limitations to theories of change in complex systems, and it's not always the answer that allows you to sort of build that collaborative working partnership. So you could also consider multiple approaches for sharing explanations of change, such as a stories first approach. Really importantly, it's not something that needs to be done just to tick a box and sit on a shelf. Going back to the idea that it's a process, it's there to help articulate your assumptions, and these will change over time, so it needs to be flexible and adaptive. So some final thoughts here. Theory of change should provide a clear line of sight between the activities and the outcomes. It's really a tool for reflection and learning. The gold standard is to ensure that it's participatory, and it must be flexible and adaptive. So we'll finish again with some reflective questions. Do feel free to pause the video to think about these before moving to the next one. So first of all, do you have a theory of change, or are you developing one? Can you see the benefits from developing a theory of change for your own local work, and that with the participants, stakeholders, community members in your place? Are you experiencing any challenges? It's not easy to complete these, and therefore it would be normal to experience challenges. It's useful to talk about those with others. So finally, thank you very much for watching. That was module 6 of 11. Next we're going to move on to process learning. I look forward to seeing you again there.